Hello, Las Vegas. Thank you for having me. Happy Nevada Day. My question, is that a thing?
No. Yes.
It's Halloween.
Someone who says it is a thing, you really had a holiday? No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really?
No school.
Then it is definitely a thing. If the kids are home from school for Nevada Day, then it's a real holiday. It's tremendous to be back here with you all. Last time I was here in Nevada, the campaign was growing. I have to say, it's taken off even more since then. I want to have a sense, how many of you have actually seen me speak before? Most of you have not, it seems like. It's like maybe 70% people who have not on TV. Thank you. So I'd love to take advantage of the fact that we're here today to actually answer some of your questions and dig in. But I'm going to talk first a bit about how the heck I came to run for president, because that was not some long-standing plan. My parents were like, you're going to be president someday. It's like through the conversations of the Yang household. So I grew up in upstate New York. My parents immigrated to this country in the 60s and met as graduate students at UC Berkeley.
Woo!
Really? Yeah, go Bears.
Go Bears.
So I was born upstate New York. My father is a physicist who generated 69 US patents over his career for GE and IBM. When I was a kid, I thought that everyone's dad was a PhD. And I learned the hard way that was not true. So I was like, what's your dad's PhD? And I'm like, so I learned. Went to high school in New Hampshire. Then went to college in New England, studied economics, political science, went to law school. Became an unhappy lawyer for 5 whole months. Thought it was not a great job. No, you can copy for that too.
I'm a lawyer.
And I have many friends who are lawyers and have had great careers. For me, at least that version of the law I was practicing, it seemed like my job was just to think about the worst things that could happen. Because that's what lawyers do sometimes. They think about all the bad things that could happen and try and structure a contract to account for those things. And so I thought, wow, I want to make good things happen. So I left to start a business. How many of you have started a business or organization or club or mailing list? So if you raise your hand, you know 2 things. Number 1, it's a lot harder than anyone tells you. And number 2, when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say? Great. Everything's always going great. So my business went great until it failed. And it's mini rise and maximum fall. My parents told people I was still a lawyer, because they are Asian. They'd be like, oh, Andrew's doing great. And at this point, I owed 6 figures in school loans, lost investors' money, was a failed entrepreneur, but I'd been bitten by the bug and said I wanted to try and get better at this. And so I worked at another startup and then another, and then I became the head of an education company, and I grew to become #1 in the United States, and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. Now, 2009 was a very tough time here in Las Vegas and around the country. I don't know how many of you lived here in Las Vegas at that time, in 2009. Now, so you remember the aftermath of the financial crisis, and I know it was really, really bad here. Can you believe that's 10, 11 years ago now, the financial crisis? In my opinion, the country is still recovering from the financial crisis. I was so struck by what had happened because I thought I had some insight as to why the economy had crashed. It had crashed in part because the wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to Angster and Brown and Columbia with had gone to Wall Street and created these exotic financial instruments that had crashed the economy, these mortgage-backed securities and the rest of it. And so I thought, well, if that's such a train wreck, what would I want our people to do instead? And I quit my job to start a new organization called Venture for America that actually operated here in Las Vegas for a number of years. And Las Vegas was one of the first cities. When I started Venture for America, I called rich friends and asked them this question: do you love America? Then the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes? And I said, at least $10,000. And so 12 people said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, oh, I thought you did. So we had a couple $100,000. I put some of my own money into. So we had $250,000 so to start. And that grew and grew to millions of dollars. Eventually, we helped create several thousand jobs around the country in places like Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Baltimore, Birmingham, Las Vegas. These are places I thought could use an influx of jobs and entrepreneurship and energy. Now, we're here in Las Vegas. How many of you actually grew up in this part of the country, in Nevada? Let's try that. California? Always from California, that's right. How about the East Coast? Midwest? South? Hawaii? I've never actually asked for Hawaii. That doesn't make sense. Love Hawaii. My wife and I honeymooned there. So, I had never seen a lot of the country before running Venture for America for 7 years. I had never spent that much time in the Midwest and the South. I was a Northeast product myself. And I was blown away by the disparities between what was happening in St. Louis versus San Francisco, or Michigan versus Manhattan. Where if you get on that plane, and those of you who are from other parts of the country know what this is like, you feel like you're crossing dimensions or decades or ways of life and not just a few time zones if you fly from some of these cities to another. As one example, Detroit is a city that was designed for 1.7 million people. The population of Detroit is now 680,000. 2/3 empty. And if you look around, you see that. You could be looking at a prosperous block in one direction and then just turn around here and all of a sudden you see neglect and abandoned houses and buildings. So I was internalizing and absorbing all of this over a 7-year period, and then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Oh, if you were here, there's a pretty good chance that you were not excited about Donald Trump winning. But there are people here who were excited about Donald Trump winning, and everyone has family members and friends and neighbors who are excited about him winning, including me. I have family members who voted for Donald Trump. And here I was, this entrepreneur that had been celebrated. I was awarded two awards by the Obama administration. I got invited to the White House. I got to introduce my wife to the president. So my in-laws really liked me for about a week. I'm like, oh, she did all right. You can tell by the picture. So I was getting these awards and accolades, and I had this sinking feeling that I was pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom. That for any job my organization was helping to create, we were getting rid of 10 or 100 because of technology. And then Trump wins, and I see this as a giant red flag or stop sign. And I say, wow, tens of millions of us decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star because we thought that the system was not working to that degree. And when I dug into the numbers, I thought I understood why Trump won in a way that was different than what the cable TV broadcasters are talking about. If you turn on cable TV at any point between 2016 and now, why would you think that Donald Trump won? Russia.
Hillary.
Facebook. Racism. FBI. Immigrants. All sort of pounded together into some kind of weird stew or cocktail. But I'm a numbers guy, and just like I thought I had some insight as to why the financial crisis had happened, I thought I had some sense as to why Donald Trump had won. If you think about our economy, it's something like, you all know this parable of the elephant and the blind men, where like blind men are like touching the elephant, and you ask what the elephant is, and then one of them's like, oh, it's like a tree trunk because I'm touching the leg, and then someone else is like, oh, it's like a snake because I'm touching the trunk. The economy is a lot like that. And I spent 7 years traveling through 18 cities and New York and San Francisco and DC, all over the country. And the reason why Donald Trump won, to me, was very clear. That we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs that were mostly in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Wisconsin, Iowa, all the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win, and did win. And if you doubt that, there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation and the movement towards Trump in a voting area. When a plant closes and people lose their jobs, blue goes to red very, very quickly. Unfortunately, what happened to manufacturing jobs is now shifting to other parts of our economy, and Nevada is ground zero. Nevada is #1 in the entire country for the proportion of jobs that will be threatened by automation in the days ahead. And I'm going to go into your industries and talk about why that is. But first, some illustrations that are familiar to you. How many of you noticed stores closing around where you live here in Nevada? And why are those stores closing? Amazon. Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business every single year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That is your math, Nevada. 20 billion out, zero back. Most common job in most of the country is working in retail. The average retail worker is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So if 30% of stores and malls close, what is that retail worker's next job going to be? When you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software, you do the same thing I do, which is you pound 000, say human, representative, until you get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. And we all do that. In 2 or 3 short years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, efficient, a little bit seductive, perhaps. What is that going to mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now making $14 an hour? And many of you know people who work in call centers because it's one of the major types of employment here in Nevada. How many of you know a truck driver? Driving a truck is the most common job in 29 states, including this one, and robot trucks are now hitting the highways in Arizona. Some of the richest, smartest people in the country are working on automating truck driving. Why? For the money. $168 billion a year in potential cost savings if they can successfully automate truck drivers. Think about that number, $168 billion a year. That's enough to make a lot of things possible. And I'm going to break this down because it's really important. They tell me they're 98% of the way to self-driving trucks right now. That sounds impressive, but you can't have trucks smashing into things at a 2% error rate and be like, oh yeah, mostly right. My trucks. And the trucks are really bad with something called snow. Because when it covers the road markings, then the computer's not sure what to do. That's why they're testing it in Arizona and in Southern California. There's not much snow there. So the question is, how can they get that last 2%? And the answer is that they're going to equip these trucks with what they call teleoperating software. Remember the first time you watched TV on your cell phone? Remember that? That was 3G. We are now rolling out 5G around the country. And the goal is to equip these trucks with teleoperating equipment such that when it's snowy and the truck's not sure what to do, it will alert a teleoperator sitting in Arizona who will then beam into the truck and drive it like a video game. Because they'll just see like out the front of the cameras. And then when the computer is sure what to do again, it will beam him back out. What do you think the ratio will be between teleoperators sitting in those facilities and the 3.5 million Americans who drive a truck for a living right now? 1 to 30, 1 out of 100. It's certainly not going to be 1 to 1, right? You're not going to have like 3.5 million people sitting there waiting to take over a truck. But there are 3.5 million truck drivers right now. Average age 49, 94% men, making on average about $50,000 a year. What happens to those 3.5 million Americans and their households when the robot trucks start hitting the highways in earnest in 5 to 10 years? Only 13% of truck drivers are unionized. There's not some grand negotiation. Most of the truckers you know are in small mom and pop type businesses. Some of them even took out loans themselves to lease a truck. Imagine having your life savings tied up in a truck and then seeing a robot truck on the highway. Never needs to stop. You have to stop after 14 hours. Your truck will actually stop you because it'll say, hey, it's time to get out and go to sleep or have a meal. Robot truck never stops. Your truck is going to be worth a lot less. Do you think the bank's going to forgive your loan? No. How do you think that these truckers are going to respond? It's not just the truckers. Another 7 million Americans work in truck stops, motels, and diners around the country, waiting for the truckers to get out and have a meal. When the truck doesn't need to stop, what happens to those towns? If you think about it, our highway system is a little bit like a circulatory system. The trucks are like little blood cells, like carrying stuff around. And then there are these way stations where the blood cells actually need to rest. When the blood cells don't need to rest, you're going to talk about the gutting of many states' economies on the interior, Nebraska, Kansas. Literally something like 10% of jobs in Nebraska support trucking right now. So this is what we're in for. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. When is the last time you heard a politician say the words fourth industrial revolution?
You on the debate.
Just now, perhaps, or me in the debate, which I appreciate. And I'm barely a politician. My first move in all of this was not even to run for president, because I'm not insane. My first move was to go to our leaders in Washington, D.C. and say, hey, immigrants are getting scapegoated for things they have nothing to do with. If you go to a factory in Ohio, it's wall-to-wall robot arms and machines. It's not wall-to-wall immigrants. We're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in our history. What are we going to do? And what do you think the folks in DC said to me when I asked, what are we going to do? Number one, we cannot talk about that. Number two, we should study that. And number three, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And I said, wow, that sounds halfway responsible, but I looked at the numbers. Do you all want to guess what the effectiveness rate was of government-funded retraining programs for manufacturing workers in the Midwest? 0 to 15%. They're a total failure. Half of the workers in the Midwest who lost their manufacturing jobs never worked again. And half of that group then filed for disability. And you then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in these communities to the point where American life expectancy has now declined for the last 3 years in a row. Do y'all want to know the last time American life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? The Spanish flu of 1918. You have to go back to a global pandemic that killed millions to find a point in American history where our life expectancy declined 3 years in a row. It is highly abnormal for life expectancy to decline even 1 year in a developed country. It is not normal. But it's happening here in the United States because suicides and drug overdoses have now overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in America for the first time in American history. So when I said this to the folks in DC, they essentially wanted nothing to do with me. I said, hey, retraining doesn't work. And then they were like, well, I guess we'll get better at it. And then like, please get out of my office. And one person in DC said something that brought me here to you all tonight. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here is going to do anything about these problems because Washington, D.C. is not a town of leaders, it is a town of followers. And the only way we will do anything about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I heard that and I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back with a wave. That is why I'm running for president. This is the wave. You all are the wave. I love being here in Nevada because you all have the future of the country in your hands. It's awesome. It's so powerful. It's in part because not that many of your fellow Nevadans actually caucus. So if you do choose to caucus, you can make a huge difference very quickly. You get some people over to caucus, we can actually present a new vision of the future of this country very, very fast. So I talk about the wave. I stand before you right now, 4th, 5th, or 6th in national polls. That's generally applause. That's cool. We raised $10 million in the last quarter in increments of only $30 each. So my hands are almost as cheap as Bernie's. Every growth measurement has us going up and up and up. We can upend this whole race and win the whole thing. In large part because we're the only campaign talking about the real issues that Americans see around us every single day, and we're proposing real solutions. So what is the vision that we have to take to the rest of the country early next year? If you were here tonight, you heard this at some point. There's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Remember that? I know the first time you heard that, it sounded like a gimmick or a joke or it's too good to be true. But this is not my idea. Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country. He called it the citizen's dividend for all Americans. Martin Luther King championed this in the 60s, called it the guaranteed minimum income. And it is what he was fighting for the day he was assassinated in 1968. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists endorsed this in the 60s, and it was so mainstream it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon. It was called the Family Assistance Plan. It came this close to being law. And then 11 years later, one state actually passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how does Alaska pay for it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology. Technology, AI, software, data, self-driving cars and trucks. How many of you saw the study that said that our data is now worth more than oil? Keep your hand up if you got your data check in the mail. None of us did. Where did the data check go? It went to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and the rest of the mega tech companies that are paying zero or near zero in taxes. In Alaska, they call this the oil check, and they love it. We're going to call this the tech check, and we're all going to love it. Yeah. the great thing is, after I'm your president and we pass these dividends and they start coming into your accounts, how are you going to spend the money in real life? Mortgage, food, student loan debt. How much of it's going to stay here in Nevada? Most of it, not all of it. Some of it's going to float up to the cloud. You'll upgrade your Netflix subscription perhaps, buy an extra blender on Amazon. But most of it will go to the things you spend money on every single day. Food, car repairs you've been putting off, daycare expenses, Little League signups, local organizations. We can build a trickle-up economy. From our people, our families, and our communities up. And it's going to be particularly vital here in Nevada, because I do want to talk about your specific issues, the makeup of your industry. What are the top employers here in the state? Gaming, hospitality, retail, transportation, call centers and administrative and clerical work, warehouses and fulfillment centers. These are among the industries that are going to get hit the hardest by automation. You are #1 out of all 50 states in terms of the proportion of jobs that will be subject to automation in the days ahead. And that's not me, that's economists who looked at the makeup of people's labor markets. You all are ground zero. You have to take this message to the rest of the country as quickly as possible, because you know the set of issues better than anyone else. How many of you saw that MGM just fired hundreds of workers and replaced some of them with robot bartenders? Do you think that they're going to be the last casino to make that move? No. The fact is, tourists kind of like the robot bartenders. And as a numbers guy, as someone who's run a business, the fact is eventually the robot cannot help but pay for itself. You know, if you play it out long enough, if you extrapolate the human wages and the benefits and everything else over time, and then you say, wait, does robot bartender cost me how much? $180,000, and then you just play it out over time and say, well, that will pay for itself in, X years, X months. I talked about call centers a little bit. There is now a packing robot that is going to help these fulfillment centers actually pack up boxes and whatnot. And there are thousands of jobs here in Nevada in that industry. You can just go one by one and see that it's happening here. This is not speculative anymore. This is not science fiction. This is your life. This is the future of your state. And we have to make a statement right now during this election cycle that we have to rewrite the rules of our economy to work for us. This $1,000 a month, it sounds far out or dramatic, but it's actually inevitable and necessary. It will make us stronger, healthier, less stressed out, will improve our relationships, will improve our mental health, will decrease domestic violence and hospital visits. It will make us all better able to adapt to the future economy, or the present economy in this case. Particularly because our current economic measurements are leading us in the wrong direction. Again, GDP, corporate profits, record highs. Life expectancy going the other direction. Also at record highs in this country, stress, financial insecurity and anxiety, student loan debt, mental illness, suicides, drug overdoses. So if these things are all at record highs and our life expectancy is going down, what good is GDP? GDP was something we made up almost 100 years ago. And even the inventor of GDP said this 100 years ago. You're not going to believe this. He said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being, and we should never use it as that. And here we are 100 years later. So if GDP is increasingly unrelated to how we're doing, how should we actually measure our progress? If you could just draw it up. How many of you studied economics like I did? Excellent. This is not an econ heavy crowd, which is totally cool. It's good if you study something other than econ, because it's pretty boring. You spend a lot of time making these graphs that look like this. Hang on, I'll use my hands. And then this one goes like this. And then if you get the direction right, it's like, give that person an A and be like, oh, I understand the economy. So if you study something other than economics, good for you. And you actually don't need to have studied economics to suggest how we should measure our progress if our current economic indicators are increasingly valueless. So if I said this got better here in Las Vegas, what would actually make you happy if I said this got better? Traffic. Clean air and clean water. Yeah, that would make me happier. Sure, I'll buy. So I'm for the legalization of marijuana at a national level. Not only that, but I would pardon everyone who's in jail for a non-violent marijuana-related offense. And then I would high-five them all on the way out of jail. I don't understand why presidents are always pardoning rich, well-connected weirdos instead of pardoning people that should not have been in jail in the first place that no one's ever heard of. That's the kind of person I want to pardon. And then they're going to come out, they're going to get their $1,000 a month, they're going to be like, wow, things changed. Things are different now. So clean air, clean water, transportation,
homelessness,
childhood success rates, healthcare, life expectancy and wellness,
prescription medication costs,
student loan affordability. How about mental health and freedom from substance abuse? We actually have measurements for these things, and as you're a president, I will go to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, really old and out of date, 100 years old, it's time to modernize it for the 21st century with a scorecard that includes our mental health, our environmental quality, childhood success rates, things that would actually be meaningful to us, and then I'll update us all on how we're doing by these measurements every year at the State of the Union. I will be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck at the State of the Union. If you like that visual, you're definitely part of the NDI. So this is how we modernize our economy to work for us. Now we have to rewrite the rules. And one example I use that's close to home, my wife is at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. How much does her work count in our economy every day right now? Zero. And we know that's nonsense. We know that she's doing the most challenging and vital work there is. I was off the campaign trail for a couple days looking after our boys, and you know what I said after a couple days? Get me back to running for president. Just because the work is so challenging. I obviously love it. If I had spent all my time with my boys, I totally would. I love it. But it's really hard work. It's very, very exhausting and challenging. And the fact that we don't count my wife's work or the work of 10 million other stay-at-home parents around the country, to me, is immoral. Like, we need to, again, evolve. And so you all are at ground zero, and you're at ground zero now of a movement that can help us advance in the way we think about human value. Because right now, we're confusing 2 things nationwide: economic value and human value. And we're saying if you don't have economic value, then you are valueless. That's why you have ridiculous suggestions like training coal miners to become coders. That actually makes no sense on the face of it. So why do we think that's even appropriate? Because we're so brainwashed to think, well, if you don't have economic value anymore, then we have to somehow transform you into something that does, or you are worthless. And if we listen too long to what the market is saying about how much we're worth, then we are sunk. Because the market is going to zero out more and more of us over time. It zeroed out the bartenders at MGM. It's going to zero out the call center workers, the truck drivers, the warehouse packers, and the radiologists, the accountants, the attorneys. This is no longer a situation where it's like, hey, you work hard and play by the rules, it's going to work out. No. Like, the AI, the software, the robot trucks, they don't care if you're a hardworking, conscientious trucker or a really slipshod one. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the radiologist's been studying really, really hard for years. The software can see tumors on a film that the human eye cannot. And it can reference millions of data points, whereas the most experienced doctor can only reference thousands. So this is the economy, the reality of the economy that we're in right now. And the only way out is if we advance a new vision of an economy that works for us as quickly as possible. It starts with a freedom dividend. It then goes to the American scorecard. And then we start recognizing different forms of work and present a vision of the kind of work that we want to do, and not that the market is telling us has value. I know it's wild stuff. This is a presidential campaign. I almost sound like I'm waxing philosophical. But that's what happened to me when I started digging into the numbers. I was like, holy cow. we're going to do a number on millions of American workers. Here in Las Vegas, you're talking about half of jobs in a relatively short time frame. If we don't get this done in a meaningful way, your way of life is going to be transformed before your eyes in one of the worst ways possible. It's true. These are just the facts on the ground. The politicians want nothing to do with it because they don't think that they have a real response. And we're going to show them what the response is. Am I right?
Yeah.
I love being here. I love being in Nevada and Las Vegas for so many reasons. But one is that you all have like this real like independence of thought and spirit to you. I mean, it's like this is not a very establishment-y town. You know what I mean? This has like the air of like a frontier town where you're all here to like make things happen and make it work. You have this can-do spirit. And when I talk about these things, like I sense that people like really, and it's not just rooms like this. We've actually run tests and studies, and the message hits harder here in Nevada than any place else in the whole country. It's a large part because you all see the reality around you every single day. But my campaign is going to be here in Nevada every day from now till voting starts. We're going to compete in this state and we're going to win it.
Yes.
Oh, it's going to be great. We're going to make history together. Donald Trump's our president in part because he got some of the problems right. In 2016, he said he was going to make America great again. And what did Hillary Clinton say in response? America's already great. That was not the right response. We have to acknowledge the reality and depth and severity of the problems that Americans are experiencing. But we need real solutions that would actually work. Donald Trump got some of the problems right, but his solutions were the opposite of what we need. What were they? We're going to build a wall. We're going to turn the clock back. We're going to bring the old jobs back. We have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our work and our value. And I'm the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you very much, Las Vegas. Thank you for letting me on. Thank you. What does math stand for? Make America think harder. That's right. We're going to let America know it's not left, it's not right, it's forward.